Hello, I'm MeshCentral, and in this video we're going to talk about the activation of Intel AMT. Intel Active Management Technology, or Intel AMT, is a remote management platform that's baked into some of the Intel platforms. And one of the things that people kind of complain about all the time is, I want to make activation of AMT simpler and easier. I want to turn on AMT on lots of my machines. And so there's different ways of activating AMT, and I want to talk about the different modes and the different trade-offs in this video. So I'm going to switch over to some slides I've made here. And I want to first talk about what is activation. What makes activation difficult and when it comes to Intel AMT. So you have your motherboard, or you have your platform, and you have the Intel ME, or management engine, which is in the ICH right over here. And you have your CPU, your memory, and so on. And so what is activating AMT? Well, it is turning it on so that AMT, starts working, starts listening and responding to management requests and so on. But what really AMT activation is about, if you get to really fundamental about it, it's about taking a secret, a little piece of a few, maybe 32 bytes or 64 bytes of secret, and putting it inside the MEH here, the ICH. So putting it inside the Intel ME. So what you want is this little bit of secret that only the platform and the rightful owner of this platform know. So this is the way that the rightful platform owner is going to be able to log in, or this is the way that the Intel AMT will know who to trust and who not to trust. And so you have this little piece of information that makes the difference between AMT kind of responding to just anyone and being able to have AMT respond to only the person it's supposed to respond to, only the correct owner of the platform. So sometimes the correct owner is, if you bought a platform in the store, well, it's just a platform owner. If you own it, it's a home system, then it's you. You own the platform, it's standing right next to you. You want to be able to use AMT to remotely manage the platform. And sometimes AMT is owned by a large IT group. So you're in a large company, you have maybe 100,000 employees, they have various desktops and laptops, and what you want is the central IT of that company to be able to remotely access and manage these devices, both in band and out of band, using AMT. And the difference, what all makes that possible, is that the central IT has some way of conveying the secret information into the platform in a trustworthy way. And so this is what makes it very, very complicated. Intel AMT and the ME is running on the Intel Management Engine. The Intel Management Engine is inside the ACH. So basically, it's like a little computer inside your computer. But your computer could be running malware. It could be running various pieces of software. And so the little chip here doesn't necessarily trust the CPU. The CPU could be running bad software. So how does it get the secret? How does it know to trust this person and not that person? When it doesn't even doesn't necessarily want to trust the CPU to tell it the secret. And so in some cases, you want the IT organization in a company to be able to use the Intel AMT chip to monitor what the OS is doing, to provide remote support, to reboot the machine, to reformat the machine. And so you don't want the CPU to be able to turn off AMT or to set it up any way they want. And so there's a whole bunch of different things that happen here, but really at its fundamentals, you have a computer within a computer, and the inner computer has to get some information, some secret that only the rightful owner of the platform will know in order to connect to that small computer and manage the big computer. So that's the fundamental problem. I don't know if I describe it correctly, but I hope I do. And so throughout different versions of AMT, there's been like different ways of activating and so on. But really starting with AMT 6.1, which is the modern era of AMT, or starts the modern era of AMT, we have two different modes of activating AMT. So there's ACM, which is admin control mode, administrator control mode, and CCM, client control mode. And so one of the first things we have to understand is, what are these two modes? Because once you activate AMT in one mode, you're usually going to, it's going to impact what features are available and the usability of AMT, depending on how it's activated in one mode or the other. So I'll tell you really quickly here, CCM, or client control mode, is very, very easy to activate. ACM is much more difficult, and we'll see why. So this is kind of my own take on CCM versus ACM. So CCM, client control mode, the operating system and the ME, the management engine, are friends. So they don't bash, they trust each other, they cooperate with each other. And so it's really a friendship or a cooperation relationship between Intel AMT and the operating system. So the operating system just says, AMT, please turn on, please activate, and then serve things or do things for me on behalf of the operating system while the platform is off. So for example, please offer this user a way to turn on the platform remotely, or access the screen, or do stuff like that. And so in CCM mode, they act cooperatively. The operating system can at any time disable AMT if it's in CCM mode. You need to have administrator access. You need to have access to the MEI driver, but as long as you have administrator access, you're basically the operating system. Then you can go and tell the ME to turn off, deactivate, and later on you can reactivate it with a new password, and so on. So in CCM, the operating system simply goes and tells AMT what mode it needs to be in. And also, AMT will never try to do something bad to the operating system, and we'll see how that kind of works. So this mode is interesting if you are using AMT as kind of a supplement to your operating system. Your operating system is working fine, it has no problem, it's trustworthy, and you want to use AMT as a supplement to your OS. You use Intel CCM. But there's limitations, and we'll get to that. Then there's ACM, and this is an adversarial relationship between Intel AMT and the operating system. They do not trust each other. So here, what happens is that the Intel AMT could be operated by an IT administration, an IT company, or your IT staff at your organization, and it's running, and it's going to try to look at the operating system to see, is it doing anything wrong? And if it is, the Intel AMT can intervene and just squash what the operating system is doing. Things like blocking the operating system from accessing the network, or reformatting the OS if it needs to, or taking over the OS even if the OS doesn't want to. And also in this mode, the operating system cannot shut off AMT. So it's not like the operating system has some magic flag it can go and say, turn off this thing. I don't like you, AMT. Off you go. It can't do that. In CCM it can, but in ACM it cannot. And so, and also what happens is that in ACM you usually have the operating system is run by, is used by some users, a user of the platform, but AMT is used by a different person, by the IT administrator of your organization. So the IT administrator may have access to high-level remote management in the OS and stuff, but they also have access to AMT. And the user has kind of constrained access. So that's kind of how it works. Okay, so CCM first. So the way that CCM is activated is super simple. You can use a tool that we have called meshcommand, or you can use MeshCentral. And meshcommand is a command line tool, and you can just say basically meshcommand space AMT CCM, and you set up a password. And as long as you're running as administrator, and you have an MEI driver installed, that's the Intel Management Engine driver, then you can have meshcommand just set a password into AMT and activate it into CCM. It takes a second. It's super, super simple, super easy. And at any time you can do, there's another command in meshcommand to just disable that. And you can disable CCM from the meshcommand even if you don't know the password. So like, say you activated the AMT in CCM, you forgot the password, no problem. You go, you deactivate it, and you can reactivate it with a different password, no problem. So you can immediately do that. And then once you're in CCM, you can access the remote website from the network port. You can set up TLS. You can set up Sira if you want, so that AMT can call out to a remote server. You can do KVM and so on. Now, the things you cannot do, you cannot do KVM or either disk redirection. You cannot do that without user consent. So what will happen is that if you ever seen user consent, basically when you try to do a KVM, it will pop up this box on the local screen with a code, a 6-digit code, and then the remote operator has to type in those 6-digit code in order to get access to KVM. Same for ID redirect and some other operations. So why is that? Well, the thing is, because in CCM you're acting buddy with the operating system, basically if the OS were to have malware on it, then malware could activate AMT, and then somebody could come in remotely and do a KVM session and take over the computer and stuff like that. So AMT basically, it's a way of asking the local user, do you really want this remote session to occur or not? And so what you do is you have this sprite which physically kind of overlaps the operating system on the graphic adapter. So the OS doesn't see this sprite. It is not displayed by an app in the OS. It is displayed by the embedded Intel graphic adapter on the screen, and basically if you try to move your mouse, you'll move your mouse straight underneath this bitmap. It is like, as close to sticking a sticker on top of your screen as you can get. It's basically AMT just putting something completely in front of what you're looking at and showing this code. And this code is known by the Intel ME and displayed on the screen. But really, this code is not known by the operating system. This is a way to completely bypass the OS. And then at the same time, the ME will display, instead of the normal KVM screen that will show the screen of the OS, it will display this prompt, and you need to type in the 6-digit code. And if the operator types in the right codes, then you will get access to the KVM. Also, if you have 2 or 3 displays, you'll be prompted to switch displays here. And this, what will that do is that it will take this sprite and put it on display number 1 or number 2 or number 3 if you have 3 displays. So if the user is watching, display number 2, and the user doesn't see the sprite, the remote operator can switch to screen number 2 and make the sprite go to screen number 2. And then you see the digits and you type it, and then you get access to KVM. So in CCM, basically, even if a malware or something happens and AMT gets activated by the operating system incorrectly, you can always deactivate it, and nothing bad can ever happen, because you would need local user consent in order for a ID redirect reformat or a KVM session to occur. Also, there's no system defense. So this entire business of filtering traffic or blocking some traffic from going out from the OS, that is completely disabled in CCM. And of course, I mentioned here, the OS can disable CCM at any time. So an application that has admin access in the OS, or in Linux, if the application has access to /dev/MEI0, then you can just reset CCM. Okay, so the beautiful thing of CCM, super easy to activate. The annoying thing of ACM is this user consent, and some of the features like system defense not being available. But really probably the one that is the most problematic for most people is the KVM. They would love to be able to KVM into a remote machine and not have to have this user consent. So, and this is often the case if you have an IoT device, if you have an embedded device, a vending machine, a display sign, something like that. You want to be able to take over the machine without, through AMT, without having to do this user consent. So, now we get to ACM. So this is the adversarial mode or admin control mode, where now AMT completely distrusts the OS. And so, of course, you can't have the OS activate AMT. That wouldn't work. It distrusts it in this mode. Fundamentally, AMT is owned by somebody else than who could own, the OS runs for the local user, but AMT belongs to somebody else. And so that's how the relationship works here. So in that case, if you're in ACM, if you've successfully activated AMT in ACM, then KVM, ID redirect, those things, the user consent is now optional. So you can turn it on if you want, but most people will opt to turn it off. And so you can, when you do a KVM session, it will go straight through and you'll see the screen right away. And the OS, of course, very importantly, cannot disable AMT once it's in ACM mode. So actually, the only way you can do it is if you know the password to log into AMT. So if the OS knows the password of AMT, then it can log in and disable it. But if you don't know the password of AMT, you cannot do it. Okay, so hopefully that's clear. And it goes back to what I was saying originally about the secret. So in ACM, in CCM, it's super easy because the secret, the OS can just tell AMT what the secret is. Like, here's the password I want you to have, and the OS knows the password and can disable it and change it at any time. But in ACM, this secret cannot come from the operating system. And so that's the root of the problem of how to activate AMT in ACM. You don't trust the operating system to give you the secret. It could be malware, or it could be anybody telling you activate this ACM. So you don't trust it. So what do you do when you don't trust the operating system and you want to activate AMT? Well, one way is that you use the BIOS screen. So you boot into MEBx, and this is the ME BIOS extension. So that's what MEBx stands for. Usually you do Control-P when you boot, or sometimes it's going to be inside the BIOS vendor's BIOS itself. But then you get a screen, you can log in. The default password is admin, ADMIN. And so you type that, and then it will ask you for a new password. You type the new password, you turn on AMT, and then it will activate in ACM mode. And of course, the key here is that it's done locally, and it is done without the operating system being involved or being in the loop. Now you're going to say, well, wait a minute, the MEBx, isn't that kind of like an operating system? Yeah, but it's one that's trusted on the platform. So it's granted this special privilege. But as soon as you boot into the real OS, then we're talking about an OS that could run any quantities of software that could do various things. The nice thing about MEBx is it's guaranteed to be local. By the way, another fun fact about MEBx is that you cannot remote into MEBx. So you know that how we have this KVM feature. You can KVM to everything except MEBx. So the BIOS, ME will specifically block that from happening. So you cannot like KVM into a device and then boot that into MEBx and like change the password, for example, things like that. You can't do that. Okay. So I hope that's clear. And so the security here comes from the fact that we know you're accessing the machine locally. And so you are showing kind of an act of, you're showing that you really have control, physical control over the machine. And so that's how this works. The other way, and that's kind of disappearing for various reasons, but it's the USB activation way. So you put a special file, you have to format the machine in the USB in FAT32, and you put a single file in the root called setup.bin. The file has to be specially formatted. Mesh Commander is has a special tab where you can load and take a look at the setup.bin file. You can create one yourself. And then when you put the setup.bin file, put it in the port and reboot the machine, the BIOS will, if it supports this mode, it will say, there's a special setup.bin here. Do you want me to read it? And basically, it will read the thing. And one of the commands that you can put in the setup.bin file is to activate into ACM mode. And in both cases, both in MEBx and in USB, you will have to provide the password you want AMT to have. And that's going to be the password that AMT is going to use to, of course, authenticate and know who is the correct owner of this AMT device going forward. So those are two ways. Now the third way, and that way has evolved a little bit over time, is what we call option 15. And so if you're familiar with DHCP option 15, it is a way where what you do is you have this, you have a router, and the router will say on the local network, your network is homenetwork.org, for example, or some network name. And so there's an option in the DHCP option 15 where you put a string like typically a DNS name or a network DNS name, and usually your machine would be machine name.homenetwork.org, for example. And so what happens is that you would your router would say this is the network you belong to, and you would be connected over the Ethernet port to that network. Now, this does not work over Wi-Fi, but only over the Ethernet, the wired Ethernet, to the physical port on your wired or wireless device. On your mobile or desktop device. You need to have your router connected to that port. Now, if that happens, then the Intel AME will say, I'm on this network here. I am on homenetwork.org or whatever. And so it will take note of this. And then if you put special software in the operating system, and that can relay traffic, and I won't get into the detail of this, but what will happen is that somebody can go and buy a certificate with the proper domain name. So it's like homenetwork.org or sample.com or something. And so you go to a trusted CA, and the CA has to prove, you have to prove to them that you own this DNS, DNS name. So you go buy yourself a DNS name, go to a CA, get a certificate, and this certificate is not a TLS cert. It's not like Let's Encrypt can give you the certificate. This is a certificate specifically made for activating AMT. So it has a special option in it, says, aha, I am, I can provision, I can activate AMT on this domain. And so it basically has, they will give you a certificate that's trusted by a trusted CA. It has a time limit, so a start and an end time. It has your DNS name, the one you own, and it has the special activation flag inside the certificate. And so MeshCentral can read this certificate, and you can have actually multiple of them. If you have a few, you can load them all inside MeshCentral. And MeshCentral will, through the Mesh agent, will take a look at the management engine and will see what local network you're connected on. And then if it sees that the local network you're connected on has a name that matches one of the certificates in MeshCentral, then there's a special dance here that can be done. There's a TLS connection that occurs, and there's there's a handshake. But the ME will basically say, I am physically connected on this network, and I see somebody who has a certificate to provision AMT with the same name. Therefore, I'm going to allow this person to activate AMT into ACM mode. And so that's how it works. What's interesting here is that you are basically activating AMT remotely, but you can only do it if you have a remote certificate matching the local network DHCP server connected on the local Ethernet port, the local managed Ethernet port. By the way, if you have multiple Ethernet ports on your network, on your motherboard, then usually only one of them will be managed by AMT. So that's important that you plug your home router on the port that's the managed port, the one that AMT is listening to. And so that will complete the activation. So so MeshCentral is fully capable of doing that. And so if you want to activate AMT, well, you have to look at the options. You can have somebody go into each computer one by one and log into MEBx and type in a new password, and then kind of take note of all the passwords for each machine, and then enter those into MeshCentral. The other way is to use a USB key. You usually pre-set up a lot of different profiles inside the USB key. You will put this inside the machine, cause the machine to reboot, say yes, and the profile is sucked in. Now, one of the things you can go directly into ACM with the USB key, but another thing you can do is you can set this DNS name inside AMT with the USB key. In that case, you can complete the activation using the certificate here, and that will work even over wireless. So you have a kind of a choice. You can use the USB key for direct activation to ACM, or you can use the USB key to basically act like this router here, and then once that's done with the USB key, you can finish up the certificate. So that's kind of the way to go. If you've already deployed hundreds of thousands of computers that have AMT, and you want to scale activate those machines, if all the machines are connected on a network that you control using the local Ethernet, and this is becoming increasingly difficult on mobile devices, especially when they don't have an Ethernet port, then this is kind of out of the question. Then the question is, can you do USB? It depends on what computer you have and whether the vendor supports that. But if it is connected on the network, then you have this option here. So anyway, that's the sort of the options you have for activating AMT. And of course, the important thing is, can you do CCM only? If you're happy with the features that CCM provides, client control mode, I would encourage you to just activate in client control mode. In fact, MeshCentral has a way where you can just click a policy and just say activate in client control mode, and that's it. And it will do it automatically and quickly. Otherwise, if you're not happy with client control mode, you want KVM without user consent, then you're going to have to weigh your options as to how to get that little secret inside Intel AMT. Anyway, hopefully that was useful. Take care and have a great day.